So I've seen an interview with Eddie Hearn, and I think there's some really interesting observations. So let's try and bring some understanding and additional context. So we're going to unpack 6 statements. Statement number 1. So according to Eddie Hearn, with regards to the AJ Fury location, Eddie holds the keys contractually, but Turkey pays the bill. So this prompts the question, who actually controls the biggest fight in British history? The promoter or the financer? Now, it's important to remember that when you're trying to negotiate a big fight, there are multifarious potential problems. Let me explain. So you can have broadcasting conflict. So you might have a conflict between DAZN and SBNN and other elements. There may be promotional politics. Matchroom and Queensberry could have conflict, and that could affect the negotiation process. You could have issues with AJ's sponsorship and broadcasting agreements with regards for it to be compatible with the actual deal that's being signed. And then you can have the issue of leverage, where both camps are going to try and negotiate from the perspective that they are the strongest point and they should get the better split. And then you can have, and Tyson Fury seems to do this, initiate public negotiations rather than negotiating quietly. Here is an interesting question when it comes to this negotiation process. Who is bigger, AJ or Tyson Fury? And when we say who is bigger, what context are we talking about? Because who is bigger in Britain and who is bigger globally? I think it's important to remember. It's important to remember this point. If negotiations are unsuccessful, this fight simply does not happen. Now, the second statement is that Eddie Hearn credits Turki Alalshikh as the real power broker. So you kind of wonder, and it prompts the question, has the Saudi money quietly made both Eddie Hearn and Dana secondary players in what could be considered their own fight? And to me, it's quite clear that it's always been clear that Turkey has power. The question is how much power? And it would seem that he has the power in this process. So if he has the power in this process, then surely he determines location. And whether this fight happens in Wembley really needs to be reframed as to whether Turki Alalshikh wants this fight to happen in Wembley. What's his priority? What's his ambition? And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, maybe this is fair, but it seems that the person with the deeper pockets has the greater influence to broker the deal. And maybe that's just simply how capitalism works. If you have the most money, then you have the biggest say. And then the next statement is that Hearn openly rejects peace talks and he wants war talks. And we can kind of deduct from here that he's selling the product of conflict. And what he's doing here is, and this is just my assumption, it's manufacturing beef or manufacturing conflict as a promotional strategy. In other words, the problem that he's having with Zuffa and the problem that he's having with Dana White is all part of the marketing machine. Now, that doesn't mean that that problem is real, but I think Eddie Hearn not only loves the conflict, he understands that the conflict sells. And think of this premise: negative news spreads faster than positive news. Ask yourself the question, is that true? And I think that premise is true. Therefore, having war as opposed to having peace is going to sell and promote the fight. And then the next statement is about Conor Benn and Johnny Fisher. And Hearn, on one hand, he acknowledges that Conor Benn and Johnny Fisher are genuine blows. So losing Conor Benn and losing Johnny Fisher is a loss. And it's funny because he acknowledges it as a loss, but then frames it as irrelevant. So there's some conflict with his response here. But let's look at both these people. So let's first take Johnny Fisher. Johnny Fisher has a movement. So Johnny Fisher has, you could argue, a strong British brand. Conor Benn, on the other hand, he has he's inherited the legacy from his father, but has his own entity. He's the boxer that you love to hate. So both Johnny Fisher and Conor Benn have attention and have virality, but for different reasons. And it's important to recognize that Matchroom, or that both Conor Benn and Johnny Fisher arguably were built. They were built by Matchroom. They were built by the Matchroom machines. There was a time investment and an economic investment. So in a sense, it's a loss. It is a loss when you have two fighters, and particularly Conor Benn, who's become absolutely huge on the world stage. And that's evident by the fact that people keep calling him out to fight him because he is, quote unquote, the cash cow. That's a big loss. And again, Johnny Fisher has that massive community, that machine behind him. That is also a loss. And then the next statement is regards to Zuffa signs powerful names, but according to Eddie Hearn, they know nothing about boxing, and Eddie Hearn calls their product really poor. And I'm not sure if he's referring to the idea of their product or the implementation of their product, but Zuffa is supposed to represents many things, but it's supposed to represent a meritocracy. And a meritocracy is the best fight the best. That is a good idea. But the idea may not be poor, but we are waiting on the implementation on the idea. And that is still pending. We're yet to see if that transpires. Also, Zuffa is about creating a culture of excitement. So again, that's a good idea, but again, we're waiting on the implementation. And also, it's important to acknowledge that if you look at the Zuffa setup, they understand that storylines are important, and it's going to be interesting to see if they're going to be able to create personalities that really resonate with the boxing public. And then the final statement is Eddie Hearn's core argument, and this is regards to Fisher, and it's saying that Fisher's fights aren't good enough for Matchroom's product, so Zuffa is welcome to fund them. I can understand why Eddie Hearn is saying that, but Johnny Fisher is exciting, and he brings a community, and he has a brand, and that means he has value. Also, putting him down may just motivate him to push further. And according to the narrative that's being portrayed, there are friends, and the question would be, should you talk about your friends like that, or is he just saying an objective truth? Johnny Fisher may have boxing limitations. And then the question becomes, can Tony Sims, the new trainer, craft a boxer that can reach world level? Based on the Dave Allen performance, you would say no. So it's understandable why, after that devastating loss in the rematch to Dave Allen, Hearn and Matchroom were not willing to invest further in the product. So here is my final statement. Think of this. So the real battle is not just AJ versus Fury or Matchroom versus Zuffa. It is power, money, control. Turkey may hold the financial leverage, but promoters still control contracts, broadcasters, and relationships. Hearn understands that conflict creates attention, which is why every disagreement becomes part of the marketing. But dismissing Fisher and Benn is risky. They bring audiences, emotion, and identity. Zuffa may still be learning about boxing, but if it combines strong storytelling with credible matchmaking, Matchroom could face serious competition. So that's the end of the video. Now I'm trying to build a digital boxing community, and that means I'm interested in your thoughts, I'm interested in your perspectives, and I'm interested in your observations. Now, if you want to support the channel, press like, hype, and subscribe. And if you want to watch more content like this, then simply click here or click here. As always, thanks for your time. It is much appreciated.